So it's time to talk about our next fictional element, and that is going to be narration and point of view. So again, this comes from certain pages in our ebook. And if you ever want to explore more about this element or any of the others that we are going to be discussing over the next month or so within the fiction unit, I've included the pages for you to go back to if needed. So in terms of narration and point of view, I feel like, the basics are pretty basic, right? In terms of point of view, we tend to recognize we've got first person, second person, third person, but we might not know any more beyond that. Or if we do, it's always a good time to re up a lesson, right? So we're definitely going to be talking about the differences between first, second, and third, and give you guys a couple examples along the way. But before we get into that, just sort of taking a step back for a second and focusing on what's the difference between the narrator of the story and the point of view, because I feel like sometimes these two terms tend to be, intermixed with each other, but technically there is a difference. So, like I have here, we've got the narrator. So, this is the person that is telling the story, right? They're going to be the central voice of the piece. They're going to take you through whatever's happening, all of the plot, all of the drama. So, that never changes. However, the point of view in which a story can be told that may shift throughout a story. So that's where, again, we've got first, second, and third. So if the narrator is the person who's telling the story, the point of view or POV is the focus in which the story is being told. And again, we're going to get a lot more into what that means in the next upcoming slides. Okay, so for whatever reason, we're going to do it out of order. We're going to talk about third person, then first, and then second, because why not, right? Okay, so third person, the pronouns are going to be he, she, they. And this tends to be the external narrator who is not involved in the events of the story at all. So we typically don't get a lot of the internalized, monologue or thinking or responses to whatever's happening. We can, and I'll talk about that in a second, but there tends to be two different types of third person, if you will. So we've got the omniscient, which is all knowing. They are basically able to tell us what's going on in multiple characters' lives, whatever they may be feeling or responding to. And it does switch consistently throughout the main characters. And then we have limited. So that traditionally stays within one character. Again, traditionally, it's going to be the main character. And this is also called the central consciousness of the story. So, regardless, we get the story told either limited third person or omniscient third person. But traditionally, most stories, and again, they can be as short as the paragraph of Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, or as long as, a 450-page novel, right? And anything in between. They in an effort for the author, right, for the writer to carry the story through however long it's going to be, they will choose one point of view and they will traditionally stay within that point of view, right? There are exceptions, obviously. I've read books, in my life where maybe different characters are from different characters, excuse me, different chapters are from different characters' points of view, right? I'm reading a book right now that plays with time and also plays with perspective. But even though each chapter is, Timmy and then Amy and then John. Don't ask me why I thought of those three random names right now. Within that chapter, it's either going to be, well, predominantly it's going to be limited, right? But John won't know what Timmy is experiencing, right? Unless Timmy tells John. So again, just there are moments where the points of view can change throughout a story, but that typically only happens whenever there's like chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, right? It's not going to change like in the very middle of a story because that would be very confusing to anybody. So that's third person. And then we have first person. So, pronouns are I. Um, obviously we've read stories in all of these points of view, but I would make the argument that if you're reading something, it's either going to be in first person or third person. They tend to be the most popular. So, first person, they're also kind of known to be the internal narrator. So, again, you're sticking within the perspective of one person from their perspective throughout the course of a story. Again, traditionally, it's the main character, right? And because of that, you know a lot of what they're feeling, how they're responding to whatever's going on. You get the internal thoughts and stuff like that. Um, One thing I do like to mention whenever it comes to first person is sometimes we have this unreliable narrator, which is honestly just so juicy and I love to hate sometimes. So these are the narrators where, because we're only getting it from their perspective, traditionally the I, sometimes it's like you almost second guess them, right? Like, can we trust what they're telling us about the other characters, about the events of what's unfolding, right? So I found this very old image on Google circa probably about a decade ago. Because there is a spectrum of unreliable narrators. We've got the most reliable in The Great Gatsby. If you've read that novel or read it recently, because again, that tends to be one of the, high school type of readings you have to do. You would know that it's from the point of view of Nick Carraway, who is the cousin. I'm actually going back in my own memory for a second. So, Nick is the cousin of Daisy, who is the love interest to Gatsby, the titular character, right? Played by Leo DiCaprio, if you've seen that version of the story, and it's the best version in my humble opinion. But we can trust what Nick's, telling us, right? He doesn't really have any, stake in the game. He's very much, secondary to the quote unquote main drama between Gatsby, Daisy, and I'm forgetting his name, but Daisy's, current husband. So he's telling us, what's happening from that perspective. And then on the complete other side, we have Fight Club, which, yes, it is a book. Most movies that are made into movies are made from books. I'm not going to spoil anything because I'm not mean. But if you've watched the movie, I highly doubt we've read the book. I know I haven't. There is some type of twist, right? Where you come to discover that the main character has not been the most reliable throughout the course of events. And I don't know the characters' names. It's been a while since I've even watched the movie. But Edward Norton, right? He's the main character. We've got Bradley Cooper, and then oh my gosh, what is her name? Helena Bonham Carter, I want to say, as like the love interest, if you will. So, the twist comes and you're like, oh wow, this changes everything, right? So again, the best unreliable narrators, typically it's revealed in a twist that you cannot believe what they have to say. You kind of, sometimes it takes a beat, but then you go back in time and you kind of remember the different moments leading up to whatever twist there was. And it changes things, right? And sometimes it's really fun and really exciting. Sometimes it's like, oh, okay, well, they were lying the whole time, right? So again, that in itself is a spectrum. And I'm not saying that we can't have an unreliable narrator for third person or even second person, but traditionally it's predominantly found in the first person, in the I narration. Okay, so the last point of view, second person. Our textbook actually has a little section dedicated to you, which is the pronoun for second person. And I like this section because it promotes the use of second person, so traditionally, and I don't know about y'all, but I have not read a lot of stories predominantly in second person. Obviously, one of the stories we'll be soon talking about is in second person. But beyond that, for fun, to my memory, I haven't really read a whole lot. And again, that's kind of common. So the one of the purposes for second person is that it can turn the reader into a character in the story, right? So, whenever you're reading something and they're referring to the character as you, obviously, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we as the readers are going to put ourselves into whatever's happening, right? And so for better or for worse, it's a perspective. It used to traditionally only really be meant for like the instructional, the self-help books, right? Which are obviously still being published today. But there has been a rise in popularity, especially recently. I'm not sure if any of us grew up reading these books. I don't even know if they make them anymore. But the Choose Your Own Adventure book series, right? That was very popular amongst like myself, my brother, my cousin, all of the kids back in the day. There's various, RPGs, role playing games that use second person. So, in terms of the style of perspective, it definitely, has been sort of coming back around. However, it can be a little invasive to the readers, and it is highly debated in recent years, especially in terms of, longer books of literature. Sometimes it almost feels as if the author, or I guess, yeah, the author is like breaking the fourth wall and talking directly to the reader. And again, like we all like what we like, we can all like different things. I honestly feel at the end of the day, good writing is good writing, and it shouldn't matter the, first, second, third perspective. It comes down to, personal preference and stuff like that. So again, I wanted to put that out there. Take a moment and think back, like, have you ever read anything, whether it was the Choose Your Own Adventure books when you were a kid, or maybe anything recently that had second person as the predominant point of view? I would be really curious, and I would love some recommendations if you have read anything. Okay, so the last slide here about narration and point of view. So this one is talking about the narrator versus implied author. So we are actually going to be coming back to this specifically within the poetry unit, because that tends to be where we might misplace, the narrator of the poem and the author themselves and kind of, assume things about them. But it also can be done in fiction, right? So sometimes, we have to kind of take a step back and think about who is telling the story. Is it the actual author that's, writing the story? Or is it the implied author? And so they're sometimes called the subconscious author. And I actually will go a little bit more into that in our next PowerPoint about characterization, because that's usually where we see it come out if it is involved in any way. But it's just something, again, to kind of keep in the back of your head whenever you're reading a piece of literature, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, there is always going to be a wall between, the characters on the page and the person who wrote them. And obviously, if you're reading nonfiction, the wall can be really thin. If it's fiction, the wall should be really stable, concrete, right? But as we will talk about, especially getting into the backgrounds of some of our authors, sometimes authors can't help but put a little bit of their, themselves, their personal experiences, their backgrounds into the writing. And that's again sort of the magic of the narrator and point of view is, sometimes, especially if it's like a thriller or a mystery or even, I guess, a romance, if you know a little bit more about the author behind the scenes, you might be able to see explicitly where like their concrete wall, for example, is kind of crumbling down and they're letting their readers into their personal lives within their art. And again, that's just one of the cool things about literature and knowing, whoever is writing the piece that you're reading. So, yeah, that is narration and point of view.